I would like to say thanks, very much so, for being invited, being able now to give some and share some thoughts, challenges, informations, facts, no fictions at all, to an audience which is very, very elaborate. So, dear friends, colleagues, guests, ladies and gentlemen, rainforestation farming is not a word which you can find in a dictionary because it's an acronym made out of rainforest and reforestation. And it was, at the end of the day, more than 50 master and about 10 PhD theses necessary just to get up with what is reforestation farming. Just to find out where are the very needed things you have to put together that people which are desperate trying to get a lunch are not forced to migrate to the next slum somewhere. And this is the situation we found in the Philippines on an island like Leyte, already back in the 90s, where, for example, a lot of farmers were at the end of the line. They had usually coconuts, but already very, very old stands, more than 60 years. And you know it much better than me, after about 60 to 70 years, you have to replace them. But they had not the means to do so. So they very often neglected their land, and at the end of the day, the trees went off and grass came in. And it was this kind of grass which we called Imperata cylindrica. That is a kind of grass which even, I say it all the time to my students, even grasshoppers call it like. And landscapes full, up from the very base to the top, just green deserts. And that is a loss which you cannot tolerate. You have to get back this sort of land, this precious part, into a kind of, let's say, economical and as well biological value. And under this aspect, you see, I would like to give you a little bit some ideas and some thoughts, share with you some ideas, including prospects, what can be done, what should be done, what might be just a dream, yeah? But as it is said, if one person just dreams, it stays as a tree. If millions are dreaming the same, it becomes a new reality. God. And this is one of those points where two things are coming together. Nature is under a stress everywhere. And man in nature is as well under stress, because we have only a very limited space on that globe. We have not a second Earth in the universe. And we have to cope with the things on this very planet, and we should not waste any longer anything. You see, this is the picture which you can see in here in a lot of stretches. A river, and the river banks are full of green and full of life. The development of such a thing into something which is after the day just a waste channel, yeah? Without any surrounding environment anymore, maybe some grass, is not a positive development, nowhere. And that means to be seen. A tropical forest is a living natural resource and is serving as credit bank. I'm not a banker, but I have learned sometimes very hard that a credit has to be paid back one day. A gift, not. So nature has not given us the possibility just to use it up like a gift, but giving us a credit over the generation and generation and generations to come. But one day is payday. And we are in front of the payday, our generation. And the next generations have already to pay back step by step something which our generation has just used up. And this is the aspect which I would like to combine in an ecosystem functional approach, where biodiversity protection and sustainable income for the rural population is a need. For example, we cannot do anything if there is natural disaster. Like this picture coming from the island of Java, just about 5 years ago, when a volcanic mountain called Merapi just erupted, just was killing everything under a 1 meter layer of ash. But, and this is the but, this is very fertile ash. And that's the reason why those people, in between a year's time, went absolutely back to the very lot where they came from, even under the aspect that they could be more or less driven away once again, anytime, by that active volcano. It's one of the most active volcanoes. And an interesting point for us at our university is, as I mentioned just before, that our university was founded due to an action of an Indonesian volcano in 1815, a big eruption of a volcano called Tambora on the island of Sumbawa, blew up into the atmosphere such an amount of ashes that there was a cloud around the globe traveling over the next years and reached our region in 1870. And then we had a summer without sun. And the entire harvest was just dead. So starvation everywhere. People were dying in the villages. They slaughtered all their livestock. They ate whatever they could get, including bark. And then the king in those days saw how miserable his people are, and his wife founded in one of the nice buildings of her an chateau, an agricultural school, just to improve. And by this means, you see, our university started due to a natural disaster. We cannot stop a volcano, no way. We can as well only be a little bit prepared to things like a tsunami. And you might remember the impact of that tsunami here to this island. And running down an enormous wave on the Indonesian side up to Buntulam, yes. And I had, in those days, connection with some of the agencies which were helping in, let's say, just helping on whatever level. So I traveled in those days in 2005 in January, up and down here the coastline. It was horrified. I was absolutely horrified of the impact of that very wave here. I was as well in Aceh, in northern Sumatra. There, the coastline was hit by a 25-meter wave. I was standing in front, about 8 kilometers inside the land, where a big ship was just sitting on the roof of a church of a village. So, this is the effect of that tsunami there. That was all a town, a part of a town of Banda Aceh. And that was all sunk in a minute. And thousands of people died instantly. And the coastline, the unprotected coastline, I have to say, just moved for 2.5 kilometers inland till today. The protected part, where you had a lot of mangrove, moved only 500 meters. And I have seen that even here, up in Puntilam, there were two villages. The one village had removed the mangrove in front of them and made charcoal and ponds, shrimp ponds in those days over there. The other village, not yet. In the one village, you had a lot of people and a lot of destruction, and in the other village, just little, just beside each other. So nature is the first front line of our protection. And if we are missing that point, that this is not an enemy, but a friend, then of course we have not a good chance as a species to survive on that globe. Anyhow, we have other aspects coming. That is the climate change. And climate change is obviously by some people completely neglected. They say it's a farce. It's something idiotic. I could turn that sentence around. Just if you are pointing with one finger to someone and saying you are an idiot because you are telling me there is climate change, then three fingers are still pointing to yourself. And that is obviously the case even today, that people don't realize it is a fact. Yeah, we cannot stop it, but we can be prepared for it. And preparedness means you should not, let's say, just run into fancy scientific kind of approach, but you have to be as near to nature and as preventive to destruction of nature on that globe as possible. You should not run ahead and just take more than you really need, because the economical losses calculated are enormous if we don't do it now. If we don't start now just to reduce what is the main thing we are able to reduce, our footprint, in particular our carbon dioxide footprint. Everybody can do that. And everybody can even calculate it for himself. That is already available. This is more or less how much CO2 you have in the atmosphere. That was at the beginning more or less of time, geology, and this was at, let's say, around the end of the Ice Age. And at the end of the Ice Age, we had roughly around 200 parts per million in the atmosphere. That can either be measured by so-called ice cores, which we are getting from Greenland and the Antarctic area. Today, we are beyond even that point. We are somewhere here with 424 parts per million. And it's well known, if you are reaching the 500 million part per million point, the first symptoms are starting for those which have already a little bit of problem with their lungs. And those are the first ones who get hit. If you reach 1,000 or even more as calculated, if we go ahead as it is, then we are all dead. All organisms on that globe. And meanwhile, we are heating up our atmosphere due to that very fact that CO2 is just like an umbrella inside of the atmosphere, and so there is no exchange to the universe anymore possible, and then a heating up effect is coming from the outer layer to the very biosphere where we are living in. And we see that in Europe, and you can see that worldwide, a rise of temperature. We in Germany, for example, we have sometimes summers which usually only were recorded in Northern Africa, not in Middle Europe. And on the other side, you have big effects in the Pacific region, for example. The Philippines had on an average in the 50s and in the 60s, 7 to 15 typhoons per year. They are now 34, increasing. And not only that the number is increasing, but as well the ferocity. And you had as well just recently a cyclone, which is a historical one. Because at that place, at that time, with that, such an enormous rainfall was unheard for Sri Lanka. And of course, that is causing something which you might not be able just to change in a very short time. You need to have a proper kind of perspective just to get proper prepared for what will come, inevitably. We have as well the poverty-driven sort of destruction. In the past, slash and burn was the normal thing a farmer could do, yeah? To keep the nutrients and to keep the fertility of the soil on a reasonable level. But in those days, there were only some people there. And they had usually a circle, burning this year, growing things the next 4 or 5 years, and then moving on to the next lot. On in a kind of 40-year circle, coming back to the old one, which has then, to that point, been again a kind of secondary forest. This is still existing, only one thing changed. They are not allowed to do that anymore in a circle of 40 years. They have to do it on one spot every year. And that, of course, makes them very, very vulnerable, or it becomes very costly because you need artificial fertilizer in a bigger and bigger amount in them. Yeah? And by this means, you are not any more sustainable on your own land. And that vicious circle must be broken. Yeah? So what was then the option of a lot of people? One of the options which were offered very often by the agricultural extensionist program was just go into monoculture with exotic trees. Trees which are fast growing, that's true, but having not even the slightest quality of a timber tree coming from a rainforest, like acacia, for example. In this case, this is a picture from Vietnam. And it's not only in northern Vietnam everywhere, it's all over Vietnam already. They have completely changed their landscape out of a Vietnamese landscape into a South American landscape, because acacia is coming from South America. It's not a plant which usually had the chance to grow in Vietnam. And by this means, they change as well all the biodiversity. And inside of this biodiversity circle, there are one group which is extremely important, and this is the pollinators. That are the bees and the bats and whatsoever. Yeah? If there are no bats, there is no durian. It's as simple as that. Yeah? And if there are no bees, no fruits at all, nowhere. Yeah? And this has not changed, because an acacia is even not eaten by any organism which is living under normal conditions in Vietnam. They have realized that now, that for example, they gain a kind of income by fast growing, and this is really just for pulp and paper factories that even cannot be used for house construction or whatsoever, and that this return is not even invested locally anymore, because most of those companies are Chinese companies. So they take the entire lot of wood chips, process it in China, so the added value is moving to China. It's not remaining in Vietnam. Now the people have realized that and even the government, that they have to do something on that. And let's say at the end of our travel in April, I'm as well invited just to go there and give some basic ideas what could be done. And one basic idea is very simple. Whenever they are harvesting a lot, they should not replant it with acacia. 10% of the lot must be replanted by indigenous planting to regain more or less the local biodiversity. Then on the long run you have biocorridors, yes, and you have as well a possibility just to improve by an economical measure as well the biodiversity. This is even worse. There is a picture from Kalimantan, from Borneo in Indonesia. And this is a palm oil scheme. And there, really, you can travel for hours and hours and hours today through parts of northern Borneo and as well in the south, where a multi-option, like a rainforest, with thousands of different plants and organisms, is just put into a one option of a palm oil tree. And this is not for the local consumption. This is for export only. And this is even not for consumption at all. It is for the fuel industry. And we in Germany even have petrol with added palm oil substances. And we call that biodiesel, which has nothing to do with bike. Maybe only because this is a tree, yeah? But while we are putting, I would say, a greenwash situation to our economy, we are supporting destruction on the other end of the globe. And this is sometimes really annoying. That something like that can happen today. Because if, for example, the economy does not need anymore this kind of added substance to the petrol, because more and more cars are running on electricity, then this area becomes wasteland, a green desert again. What to do? And this means you need new ideas. This picture is really hard to believe. The very inhabitant of that former forest area, the orangutan, yeah, is here transported by a laborer out of the plantation, half dead. Because all, from the ant to the orangutan, is just affected by a thing like that, for sure. And all those creatures which cannot fly or flee, are dead. And it's a striking thing. When we traveled once in a region like that, there was a rainforest stretch of about 2 kilometers along the road, and you had voices of birds everywhere. And then came plantation. It was silent like on a cemetery. Not one sound, even not a cricket. And that was really as well something which I never will forget. And this is, of course, sometimes the so-called modern kind of development in a lot of countries, which have not yet got the idea that we have only one job, come on. This is a picture from the Philippines, where an entire village just died in about 10 to 15 minutes because a big landslide came down. It was at 10 o'clock in the morning, on a market day, all kids in school, and then this massive material just came down and covered the entire village. Not one survived. But this is not only in tropical countries. We in Europe are facing, due to the effect of heating up, more and more challenges in our mountains and even outside. For example, just last year, an entire village in Switzerland was just threatened by an enormous landslide, which was blocking the small river, and the entire village is gone. They are not allowed you even can't go back anymore. And every year we have now as well, due to the effect that, let's say, the permafrost situation in the mountain is changed, we have this sort of landslides everywhere. Sometimes then in connection with floods. You see, this is the challenge impact of floods in Sumatra every year. And at any time you get all these informations about floods everywhere. For example, from Australia in Queensland to Southeast Asia, India, South America, Europe, everywhere. And this is a trend which should really, let's say, be a kind of wake-up call for a lot of authorities. Don't think this will just go away and will be a single event. And I'm sometimes saying, you see, a century event, which is, as it is called sometimes, is now coming every fortnight. So we are shortening the century event into something which is daily possible. This was as well one of the biggest signs in an American town like New Orleans has been sunk into chaos in between 24 hours. And the very interesting point is in a country where they never thought that something like that can happen to them. And in particular, one thing was very interesting, the social behavior of the people. In between 24 hours, they became savages. A lot of those people, even in hospitals, just left their patients just to save themselves in New Orleans. So even our social behavior and civilization can easily break down if we are hit by a thing like that. Now, what sort of challenges we have to overcome? The one is a landscape rehabilitation. We need to go back to a near-to-nature reforestation of degraded land, as near as possible. We need to reduce soil erosion sedimentation. The water retention capacity and soil fertility has to be improved. Biodiversity rehabilitation through use of indigenous organisms only. Transformation of monocultures into intercropping system wherever possible. And in particular in those areas which we call buffer zones. Then we have poverty alleviation as a challenge because people need to live in this landscape. And we have a global impact, and this is the entire climate change business. So, in the beginning of the 90s, and we have seen in the Philippines, most of the areas look like that. They are still in a lot of areas looking like that. And that was a challenge. How can you bring back into an area like this a reasonable kind of agriculture, which is at the same time serving the biodiversity and as well having all the positive aspects what a forest or a tree stand usually is providing for mankind. And from this situation, and maybe even that picture, because that is the picture when we, together with the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, started to look around whether any kind of place in a buffer zone might be suitable for a model just to try out something in cooperation with the scientific community, but as well with the local community, perhaps with the kids of a school. And this was here, that very site, where we have been just a couple of days ago again. And I have to say, it is admirable what happened there over time. I do not have the latest picture here, but I have that picture in my brain and even in my laptop. And it is really great seeing that if you have the right approach, then an initiative can really make a change. In the form that, let's say, you get back a reasonable sort of landscape which is suitable for the very place in the buffer zone of the Singaraja forest, and to have as well an enthusiastic kind of involvement of young people, including students, teachers, officials from the village itself, in just being proud what is now a part of their very life. The regrowth of an area which was before that useless, of no use. This is an example where we have been in southern China, in the area where the so-called tea tree is coming from. You most probably know it much better than me, that tea originally is a tree, a tall tree, not a shrub. This is the dwarfing of a tree to make it suitable for that's what you need. Then they have still some of these tea trees left, but a lot has been cut over time for cattle breeding in the mountains. And now a project is bringing back that tea tree as a form of tea forest into that very area. And you see the leaves of a tea tree is picked with a ladder, they're just climbing up. It is not very easy at all, but is absolutely high quality. They call it poor tree, which is very high quality. And in this project, you see what's interesting, that even an airline like Lufthansa was interested in get that for their flying in and out of China. And by these means, they even supported that project. This, I have already mentioned, is a must, that you are transferring, let's say, this kind of acacia monocultures into something more diverse. But this is already now recognized by the government there, like it is recognized by the government of the Philippines, which were able, or which were convinced in 2004 and brought into law, forestry law, that wherever applicable, rainforestation farming approach should be used on all the islands of the Philippines. So there, from a lot, we started on a model lot at the university of just 4 hectares. There is now more than 16 to 17,000 hectares under rainforestation, with thousands of families just doing it on their own, because they have been trained. The extension service is giving them the ideas. Nurseries have been mushrooming, I have to say, because actually even on roadsides, people started a nursery and are offering these very beautiful kind of trees like a diplocarp even to the wider public, to plant them in the backyard, in a shady place. And at the end of the day, they have a beautiful tree, a very ornamental tree. As well in northern Laos, there is in the moment a struggle going on between those which would like to keep and those which would like to change everything. Because a lot of so-called Chinese investors are coming into the country, and they are usually interested in completely different things than just to do a reasonable sort of agriculture in Laos. Therefore, they are sometimes killing entire landscapes, removing everything what is natural just to replace it by cassava or mango. And this is even not for the local market, it is for the piggery market in China. They are transporting everything just over the border into China. And I discussed with one of those people, of course, as well, why the hell you are doing it, and what is your economic return? Yeah, what you are thinking about at what time you have to get the economic return in your purse? And he said 2 years only. After 2 years with a scheme like that, with this cassava, and with a just export for the piggery market in China, he has got everything, all in stake, including profit. And then he is leaning. And then the soil is depleted. And then there's nothing left, just as death at the end of the day for the people. And then they have to see what they can do. And this needs to be stopped. And you can see that in northern Thailand, Laos in particular, that, let's say, a desperate situation of farmers is misused by, let's say, a very aggressive economy coming over the border. This is an example from the island of Java, where we have as well started approach of rainforestation farming. That means growing something under trees in an area near a temple, a Buddhist, a very famous, world-famous temple called Borobudur. And there, for example, this village is today completely on its own. They are really well off because they they added a new point to the rainforestation farming, and that is ecotourism. They just are selling now that beautified landscape to tourists. And they are showing them around what they have done on what kind of diverse sort of cropping system they have done instead of just cassava as before. And it's all covered with trees, and by this means, you see, you get all the benefits of a near-to-nature situation. What do you need to do if you want to set up a rainforestation farm? The first thing, of course, is you need to evaluate the situation. And the most basic thing is the very person who would like to have a rainforestation farm system must be the owner of the land. And this is sometimes tricky, as I had learned. For example, in the Philippines, you can find situations like that. The coconut tree, the tree itself, is owned by one person. The coconuts are owned by another one. And the area the very coconut tree is standing on is as well owned by someone else. 3 owners for one tree. And this is not easy to overcome. And the other thing is that are the long-term obligations of farmers. For example, we had a case where a farmer wanted as well to join the rainforestation model, but was then very hesitant to do so. And we asked him, why the hell you are hesitating? You see, it was as well in a mountainous setting. Your farm is going down the drain, yeah, if you are not shifting it from just a coconut situation into something more diverse. And then he said, and then we said, look, you are selling all the time to a guy who is coming up, all your produce, yeah, and he has the monopoly on your material. Why? he is not paying you a reasonable price. It was lower than the normal market price even. Yeah? Why you on the shifting to another one? And then that story came up, which was for us as Westerners very interesting. He was paying back obligations of his grandfather. His grandfather got a credit from that family who is now the middleman. And that was a relatively small amount, but he could never afford to pay it completely back. So he is now in the third generation paying a credit back and cannot escape an exploitive kind of setup. So we asked him from our project side, how much is it? How much does your family has to pay out? And it was just 3,000 euros. So we gave him the 3,000. He was out of his wits that someone is doing that, yeah? And he was immediately shifting to another sort of person and joined the rainforestation farming. And he's still there. I have seen him last year. Now he's looking at the kids. Doing well on a reasonable level. Had no any more that problem, which was luring on him, yes, all over the time. So sometimes things like that are really very, very needed to be investigated. Who is actually the very owner of what? And if this is clear, then of course you could start by just trying to give the people proper ideas in form of a workshop or extension training, yeah, and by then as well supplying them with the first set of techniques, because this is the next problem. In a lot of cases, for example, in the past, in the forests, the very good trees have been felled. That means those which we call today mother trees, because they provide the best seeds. But if you have removed in the past everywhere these kind of the number one trees, you have to rely on second good material according to the seed. And then you are having not the possibility to regain actually the very top kind of material you would like to have. I was once as well as one of the invited consultants in China on the half-insular of Leizhou. The governor of that area wanted to have back the old natural stands and the old sort of coverage wherever possible on that island, and placed a brown shed for the next 20 years with an amount of more than 30 billion US dollars for the entire peninsula. 30 billion. So a group of experts came just to make the feasibility study whether this is possible or not, what you need to do. And at the end of the day, we had a roundtable conference with all the stakeholders, and we came to the result: you have crossed the point of no return. Because during the Cultural Revolution, they had removed everything which was natural on that island, on that peninsula. So they had not seeds anymore, nothing. The next source was in Myanmar, where they could get some seeds which are similar to that region, not the same one. So sometimes if you are going too far, you cannot rehab anything anymore. You have just lost it. So after that, you propose, let's say, you have to do an assessment of the inventories, and as well you have to make up a sort of mapping and plant design for the region, by this means getting an idea what you want to do. Therefore, you see, you need a little bit of, let's say, outside help. But this is usually available in any country. It's no problem at all. Then you should as well look, what is the situation even in the soil? Yes, because that is very important. So a soil profile is very, very helpful, including as well climatic patterns need to be looked at. After that, you need really to look for seeds. If there are no seeds in the very vicinity, which are still able to be used in a nursery, this is the next step. You have to prove that. Yeah? Then, of course, you are a little bit in troubles. What can we do? But in most of the situation, and absolutely here in Sri Lanka, it should not be a problem at all. Yeah? But one point is as well very interesting. I learned when I was at school and in the universities that you can't breed a rainforest tree in a nursery. That was in all textbooks in the 50s, in Europe, for example. And I was then very interested and dug myself into the history of how the hell is a sentence or an idea like that is coming into a textbook. And we found the following story. At the beginning of the last century, a lot of botanists, like Mr. Ashton, who was here in Sri Lanka very active, roamed around, coming from Britain, from a Kew garden, usually, yes. They are very much, let's say, excellent kind of botanical garden. They went into these forests, they collected whatever they saw. And they brought in their rucksacks as well seeds to Europe, to Germany as well, to Britain, France, and placed these dipterocarp seeds into the basketball compost over there and started to look what's going on. So the small sapling grew up, but when the material provided by the seed himself was used up, the plant collapsed. And they were investigating and trying again and again and again, change this so that, and it was no good result at all. So they came to the clue, a rainforest tree like a dipterocarp cannot be grown in a nursery. They should have tried that here, in Sri Lanka or in the Philippines, because you need for all those trees something which is called mycorrhiza. That is a fungi who is living in symbiosis with the tree around the roots of that tree. That fungi is providing nutrients for the tree, and the tree is providing a little bit of nutrients in form of sugars to the fungi. So if they would have brought a little bit of soil with them, then they would have known, okay, it's growing. Otherwise, not. Even if you provide the best of compost soil from Europe, it will not grow. This is the background of, let's say, why so long it was taught in the textbooks of the foresters you cannot have a rainforest tree in a nursery. A plastic bag, if you are transporting those seeds, which are usually moist, for a couple of hours in a plastic bag, then the aeration is stopped, and then molding is starting immediately. And it's very fast. You know it maybe from other things. So we are recommending transport it not in a plastic bag, but in a basket, house made from bamboo or whatever, or you are transporting it into a banana leaf. Yeah? but it is well a good sort of pathway. That is the only reason, not to, let's say, mold. That mold cannot start immediately. That is the point. That is a little bit like with milk. Yeah, you see, that is one of the reasons why, let's say, in tropical countries in the past, our milk cows never really were very, let's say, good, due to the fact that the transport of milk uncooled is immediately a kind of start for the bacterial cultures inside of the milk. Yeah, that means you need to cool it as good as possible from the very beginning, otherwise you are spoiling a lot if you need to transport it for some hours. So this is as well from Singaraja, the Dendrocarpus atlantica seed. Yeah. And that is, of course, one of the most precious kind of trees you can have here in this country. An interesting point is as well, I just will come back to that, sorry. We looked as well into the one thing, for example, a lot of nurseries, they collected just from one tree. There were a lot of seeds. But then this is just one genetical clone. And this is not so good. If you are not providing, let's say, seeds from different ends, afterwards you have just a monocloned kind of situation on your area. So it's better to get from more than one mother tree the respective seeds and use that on your lot. So, for example, as well, setting up a nursery, I noticed not to discuss that in detail, you know it most probably much better than me. There are only very small hints which might be helpful. The one hint is if you use the usual sort of plastic bags, they are usually hollowed. Yeah, we discussed that when we were out in the field. And if the plant or the sapling is sitting maybe for months on the same spot, then the first sort of tiny roots are creeping out of those holes. And if then that pot is sitting straight on the ground, those roots are moving into that ground, and if you are taking then that pot, you are just ripping off the most precious part and then the tip of the root. So it's a small hint, sawdust. You have to put a layer of sawdust or sand, of about 10 to 15 centimeters and place the pots on that one. This is easy to remove and is not disturbing the root tip system, which is very important. All the rainforest trees are as young seedlings sitting in the shade. So a nursery with forest trees must have a shade cover. In what form, that doesn't matter. But if you are putting those seedlings into the bright sun, they will die. And the point is, for example, and it's very clear, we have as well done a lot of studies in the forest itself before with all the different sort of trees. How is the cycle of life from seed to tree? And you know it, usually a seed has not to lay too long on a humid ground, or it would just mold. That means they are starting immediately, getting out, and then they are growing up to a certain height under the mother tree, but not further on. They slow down their own growth. Even photosynthesis rates are low in the seedlings until they get the chance to get up. And that is when the mother tree falls. And then they are really shooting up. And this is the reason why you have in a trunk of a dipterocarp hardly any kind of, let's say, side twigs until you are in the canopy. Because they are just shooting up with building a canopy the moment they are reaching the sun and then spreading. And this makes that timber so precious as well, yeah? In comparison with all our trees in Europe, for example. And that is as well something which needs to be kept in mind, but it is easy to teach and to follow. So, only as one example from Vietnam, there are everywhere commercial nurseries. That means these are mainly farmers which judge on the very thing that people are aware that they need more and more seedlings of all kinds. And this is really as well a small enterprise promotion. If, for example, the government agencies or whoever could be convinced, please plant more diverse, and not only just acacia, as in this case, which is just provided as a one plant to cover an entire landscape, which is, on the biodiversity aspect, just a loss. You can as well collect, let's say, seedlings, not too much, but seedlings directly in the forest. So it doesn't matter for the forest. Usually under a mother tree you have thousands of seedlings. But to transport those seedlings and as well to get them to overcome the shock of being uprooted and brought into another situation, you need to take care of them in a way which is sometimes tricky. The transport is the first thing. It needs to be transported, let's say, in a reasonable, let's say, leaf situation. Usually use bananas or teak leaves, which are big enough. And then you need to do something which is sometimes very strange. You need to cut off parts of the leaf, because under stress, those seedlings outside would die due to too active photosynthesis. So we are reducing it by just cutting 2/4 of the leaves and putting these sort of seedlings into a so-called recovery chamber that is mainly made of, let's say, a plastic and bamboo construction. And you just leave it and water it from time to time for about a month or two. And when the first new leaf is coming up, they have adapted to the new situation. You see, these sort of recovery chambers are very helpful, that the survival rate of wild weeds is very high. You can do it, but then usually you have a reasonable big loss if you bring already the seedlings into a new sort of situation for them outside somewhere in and not underneath the mother tree. And it is absolutely okay to take some of those seedlings, because only one of them will at the end of the day take over at the very place of the mother tree. All the others will be recycled into the ground by nature itself. And therefore, we have as well, usually you see, this is only for extremely precious sort of trees to recommend, because the impact is much higher than just start from the seed. But, and this is the but, the seedlings, of course, have already started. So, let's say the regrowth afterwards is much faster. And by this means as well, a faster forming of a canopy. That is then the beneficial side of the seedling, instead of just growing it from the seeds. But otherwise, you see, it's really to recommend that only for extremely precious material, and all the others just from the seeds. And this we have as well, together with our partners in the Philippines. We just tried out a lot of different sort of situations and a lot of, let's say, how to get the best out of it, until we came to the solution that this is really to recommend kind of approach. Because this is one thing which we as scientists are very often not thinking about. It must be very practical for a farmer. Yeah? And it has no value for a farmer if it doesn't work. Here we have a picture, you know, maybe as well. That was the beginning of the project with the Wildlife Society at Dilmah, when those pupils, those students, brought the first lot of tree seedlings from a nursery they had at their school, yeah, to the main lot. And these trees are now 6 to 7 meters high. That is really something. And by this means, you see, you get to a certain extent as well a sort of relation between a student and his teacher to a tree nearby. And we were told, even I asked one of this one teacher, they went very often by themselves to that very space, to that very area, just to look whether the one which they have planted there is still doing good. And this is as well something you should, wherever possible, put a positive sort of relation between the planted material and that one who planted it. So not that he's not thinking, you see, forestry department has replanted that, not my matter. My goats are allowed to go in. And by this means destroying a lot. Or as I have once, that was coerced in Indonesia, had the experience. There was a reforestation scheme by the government, and they engaged, of course, the local people, but they did not really give them an ownership to the very tree. That means it was still the tree of the forestry department, not owned by that very person. We, in our project, in some cases, we even gave a document for each planted tree to the very person, very farmer, saying that this tree has been planted by this person or by this family, because if he wants to harvest it in 20 years' time, sometimes, you see, they were running into problems to show that this is not coming from the native forest, not coming from the rainforest. They have not stolen it. They have really planted it, nursed it, and now it's harvest time. So they got a document from us saying that this is a planted tree. And in this case now in Indonesia, it was like that. Those people planted, and usually this official told us, you see, it's just not working at all, because in a year's time, usually it was gone again. The entire, let's say, planted material was burned by chance, or was even cut by chance, or a cow or a buffalo herd was just moved into that. And then we asked the farmers, and they said after a time, look, we need to generate income. If we don't have an income, otherwise, we just cut the entire lot and replant again. So we get a job, full stop, which I can see. You see that, for example, if they are not really the owners of that very tree, they are sometimes very reluctant just to remove it again and again and again. So this needs as well to be in mind if you are starting a system like that. You know that very person sitting over there planting in that space. Excellent. But Douglas, I'm really very happy to see you again on this occasion. And this was a real big kind of approach, with the first kind of, let's say, possibility to start with a model for the local community and as well for, let's say, the entire interested public. Now, as I told already, you have to start on a, let's say, threefold system. That means first you put a pioneer, then you put, let's say, the plants which are the next generation, and at the end of the day you are planting the long-term ones, which usually need, under the given conditions here, at least 30 to 50 years to be harvested. But you cannot, from the very beginning, say, yeah, look, you need now to wait for 50 years until you get a return. So you have to give a return from the very beginning, and by this means more or less building up a sort of subsistence economy which the farmer can handle himself. Only some examples you see of the recommended trees in form of fruit trees and timber trees. And then as well, at the very beginning, the first time, you need a little bit of pruning and you need a little bit of weeding, ring weeding, not everywhere, but just a ring around the small plant until it is above the bracken. Then it is able to go on its own. Here, one mangosteen farmer in the Philippines with his 2-year-old plant, 1-year-old. And here some pictures from as well the Philippines. That was the situation here, first year. Already in the second year with the pioneers, you had a situation like that. And in the fourth year, most people believed not that there was just 4 years ago a grassland. And this is really something that is very, very promising, and it is as well rewarding to a certain extent. This is the situation of 2024 in the Philippines. It started just here at that place, the University of Visayas State University. And it just sits and spread over all the islands on its own. Because a lot of, let's say, groups, but as well today the officials from the government, the agricultural extension services, are promoting wherever applicable that sort of system, because they found out this is the most sustainable approach in the Philippines for a subsistence farm. Because they have a big problem, migration from the countryside into towns by desperate people. And that should not happen if you can do something for that. At the end of the day, you see, you could look into a situation like that you have crops. This is as well an interesting point. Most agricultural producers which we use today are sun-dependent. And very often, as well in tropical countries, you are removing all the forest, burning everything down, just to put corn on top of the soil, or cassava, or taro, whatever, yeah? Instead of giving those farmers as well the idea, look, part of your things could be moving from a sun-demanding agriculture into a shade-tolerating agriculture. Look for those kind of produce which need shade. And this is, for example, most of the spices, like ginger, like cardamom, even pepper needs some shade. So a part of your income should not come from sun demanding, but from shade tolerating organisms. And this is as well then more sustainable for that very person and serving the purpose of keeping biodiversity intact. After about 15 to 20 years, an idealized rainforestation farm could look like that. And of course, these 15 years have passed in the Philippines. Now let's have a look whether it's still hard. This was the situation in 1993. This is the situation at exactly the same spot in 2007. This was the situation in 1996, same spot 2006. This here is a farmer, and this was grassland 15 years ago. And even trees like that, in between 15 years, we got that sort of case on its ground, just by following the rainforestation system. And of course, he is today one of the multiplicators of that system, even on that island, because even the officials are coming now and would like to have a look and how that could be achieved on an area which was given up because it was grassland. It was grassland before. And of course, this is something which is extremely necessary. Farmers should not preach anything. Show it by a model, so that they are able to follow. Because they have got in the past a lot of instruction and preaching. And you are then left alone very often just to do something, instead of some model in the landscape, just one farm with a colleague as well a farmer who is doing a thing like that is more convincing than any workshop of any agricultural extension service. I know that tree personally because I planted it in 1992. It is a paraphorea, and it's now a beautiful rainforest tree in one of those farms. And it was very often said, let's say, and this is still the thinking in a lot of levels, that a tree is just a standing plywood. But that is not true. And in all economies around the globe, it's for me very interesting, only a felled tree has a value, not a standing one. There is never given any sort of value to a standing tree before he is not felled and then going into the national product. Yeah? And that must be changed. Because you see, what a tree is actually giving to us was already calculated years ago. This is only one example from the United States, that you are getting from an 80 years old, let's say, average tree in the United States somewhere, the production of this amount of oxygen. No, this is for the lifespan, not per year. If that would be for a year, I would go into that business. Anyhow, pollution control, this amount. Anti-erosion, water retention. And if you are adding that up under economical conditions, they came up to an amount of about $150,000 by one tree. If you need that to produce via technical or other systems, which is enormous. Why the hell this sort of let's say, economical value of a standing tree is never calculated into the very bills. And I have not added what you are doing to the environment if you are felling a tree. In form of you are losing soil, yeah, you are depleting soil, you have possibilities of floods, you have possibility of pollution for rivulets and rivers. All this should be put into the economical calculation for the very timber. And that timber of a tree like that would be extraordinarily precious. Yeah? And we are coming up with a complete different story in connection with protection of nature. So we need to see the real price as consumers and not a fictive price because nature has no value as long as it's not economically used. Here, the example of pioneer, let's say, harvesting. This is, for example, the durian, a very nice fruit tree. You know much better. I don't like it at all, but this is my private sort of handicap because I just follow the very thing which once Mr. Raffles, the founder of Singapore, said, and he said, the smell is hell, the taste is heaven, which is true, but only for a part of our people. Anyhow, as already said, integration of spices, so-called spice trees, cinnamon, you have, cloves, China bark tree, whatsoever, yeah? Whatever you have, you could add to that very thing. This is, for example, as well, a former grassland, which, and this is another point which we, from our project side, said, we asked the very farmer, what is his personal expertise? More timber, or more fruits, or more this or that, and then start with what he knows best and integrating from all sides whatever you would like as well to have in addition to that very thing. For example, one thing which very often has been neglected, these are, let's say, fiber producing organisms, yeah? Because this is as well something as a raw material which is very needed on any farm. Indeed. So to produce a kind of own fibers is to recommend on what level whatsoever. In the Philippines, you see, they have one very good fiber producing, shade tolerating plant, and this is abaca. That is a banana species which in former, I would say centuries, was producing the so-called Manila hemp. This Manila hemp was extremely interesting for the hanging of people in the past by such people like the colonialists, because they used that specific sort of fiber which is really strong for a lot of purposes. We had a project in the Philippines together with Mercedes-Benz, the automobile industry, to replace glass fiber and replace it by a natural fiber, in this case abaca, in one of the parts of the car. And more than 300,000 A and B class cars have been equipped exactly with this sort of recyclable part of a Mercedes-Benz. And then one thing happened which killed the entire thing up till now. That was a virus coming into the plantations there and killing all the abaca. So they were forced to go back to glass fiber because it could not be replaced. But one day you see maybe these virus, bunchy top, they called it, can be cured, and then they will come back because it's for them as well something very special. That means it is for them an option to bring an organic, natural part into a car and make it a recyclable part of the car, which is good for them. Image is okay, yes, and for the farmers, it's just a wonderful adding to their normal sort of production. Here, example, cardamom and lemongrass, gingers, all can be said to be shade-tolerant crops. And as I already mentioned it, in that very specific top, they are now going into ecotourism in addition to what they have, because for tourists in a growing, let's say, number, ecotourism becomes interesting. Just seeing all these crops and how they deal with that and living in an environment which is not a plantation, which is not a monoculture. This picture I have already shown to you, and it's not really just peanuts what forests are providing for the atmosphere. It's really very substantial. And a lot of people know that now, but it is not yet possible just to stop this sort of very destructive approach into a monoculture for a given time. Because one thing is very clear, this is for us clear, you never get back a rainforest again. You can come to a near to a rainforest situation, but you can't get it back as it is. If it's down the drain, if it's gone, it's gone. And you see, there is one new kind of aspect which I would like to just bring forward. How economy comes into a new level, even for a subsistence farmer. And that is the carbon credit market. And you know most probably that there is the so-called compliance market, and there is the voluntary carbon market. Compliance market, that is what governments are discussing everywhere, and saying you have to reduce this, you have to reduce that, this car cannot run anymore, and. The voluntary market is to offer some industry or some companies just what you cannot technically solve yourself. Why not at least compensating it, in the form that you are supporting a natural setting in form of forest somewhere. So we have different sort of approaches. It all started in 1992 with a very well-known conference in Rio, where a lot of governments came together and just agreed we have to do something. And every year there is a so-called COP. It means the following next kind of meeting, just to see whether people which have signed something are really as well following it, what they have signed. And we are now at the 30th COP, and the result is minimal. This is because you have not really a kind of enforcement in place to say, look, if we don't work as a mankind together on that very topic, then of course we are all at the end of the day the one which then we call the victims. But I followed most of those conferences, and sometimes with my students, you see, I said to them, look, that was from talk to small talk to gossip. That is actually what really can be seen in quite a number of those things. And we cannot afford to go ahead like that. Or we will start, whether we like it or not, whether we are on the positive or the negative side, everybody. But the first group, the very first group who is feeling it, these are the farmers and the poor people. because they have not the means to compensate anything for a longer term. So this is one point which can now be as well thought over. Can a reforest area or a standing area which is protected by a community give this community at least a short return in form of being certified as a carbon sink? And this is a worldwide sort of approach. And unfortunately, each region is doing his own sort of, what shall we do? For example, the European have a standard, the Americans have a standard, Great Britain has a standard, Germany has started a standard, there are international standards, and that. Yeah. We, in our setting of Europe, we are very often using, let's say, the IOC standard, which is very, very tricky. And it's not easy to do that, but it's possible, even in cooperation with the farms. For example, but this is now maybe a little bit too scientific. You can calculate, but you need the respective expert for that. And an organization like the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society has absolutely the capacity to do so, providing the respective background expertise for even something to calculate a given area as a carbon sink. The groundwork, which is necessary, can be done by the farmers itself, under maybe the guidance of a student, because they need just to make an inventory of their trees. They have to have the height, they have to have the diameter of the respective trees, and if they have that all together, you can calculate exactly how much carbon is stored. And if you have the storage of carbon, you can calculate how much CO2 this lot has taken or is taking regularly out of the atmosphere. And that can be certified and that can be sold. Here, some examples which were even supported as well from our side. For example, these mountainous areas, all that around here, about 653 hectares are certified for that very owner of that area, and that is that university in the Philippines, that campus. And they got a respective amount from industry, in this case in Germany, who wanted to compensate a part of their footprint. And by this means, two things came together. The one was able to reduce their own footprint by a reasonable thing, and the others were put into a position to protect something which had before that no value for them at all. The other example is in Kalimantan, in Borneo, an entire village, a Dayak village of the ethnic group of the Dayaks. They had an ancestral forest of 5,000 hectares even. And they were very much under pressure from palm oil industry, which is surrounding even this sort of ancestral forest, and wanted to buy it from them. And they said, no. But at the end of the day, you see, they saw as well that all the other neighboring villages have sold already, got a reasonable certain amount, and then the bulldozers came and eradicated everything in between a fortnight, and planted palm oil. So they came up, is there any chance as well to get something out of an ancestral forest as a kind of return, economic return, so that we are not really forced to do the same? And the solution was the certification of the entire lot has been done and is in place. And this is now very interesting, because this lot is today, even for a forest department, the source for seeds. Because after the palm oil, there is still a necessity to do something. But if they don't have seeds, they can't. So this is now a precious sort of land, even for the foresters, which before that recommended just remove the entire lot, take palm oil, and that's it. Here, situated in the Philippines, where, let's say, young farmers, these two boys are farmers, they have just gone elementary school level, were from the very beginning involved in collecting the data. And we are extremely proud of being a part of something so big. And by this means, we're as well very reluctant not let anyone just encroach or remove anything out of that forest, which they have been more or less, but now the certification, the entire process. And in Vietnam, this example is really taking up momentum in the moment that the government itself is now very interested in how come then it's possible to involve even farmers in a so sophisticated process, and how come that, let's say, companies, and they are looking now for companies in the country itself, are reluctant just to support something like that. Because you see, we are coming to an end. A first reminder. These are human beings, pollinators, in China, in a plantation of cherries, because due to the fact that they had indiscriminately used chemicals in the past, they have no pollinators anymore. So they have to engage people just to do the pollination, flower by flower. This picture is progress. Should never happen anything like that. At the end of the day, you have to engage people just to do what the bees are doing free of charge. And another reminder for all of us, my generation, in particular, we have sometimes used too much from one is just once here. That means a rainforest is not a mine. It is a natural setting which needs not to be mined at all. It needs to be integrated in a certain way for all the things which human beings are needing. That is, we need a proper environment. We need to live in peace with all the other creatures. And we need to have, for generations to come, soil for a living. If we don't keep that in mind, then of course the doomsday is not too far away.